Welcome back to Spin Magazine's Lip Service. I'm with the incredible Rick Springfield. How are you? Thanks for coming. It's raining. You were coming from Malibu. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's not easy these days. After the fires in Malibu, it took me 3 hours to get to Beverly Hills the other
Wow.
day.
Well, I really appreciate it. Also in LA, when it rains, people can't drive, Rick, and it's a whole thing, right?
Yep.
People are like, I'm from New York, so rain is like an everyday occurrence for us. But out here, I don't know. I literally
People
like
wig
you.
out, man. They
People
can't handle
go
it.
crazy. How has it been? It's been devastating, obviously, what happened in Malibu, but how's the sentiment there? I'm going to pull the mic a little bit closer to you, too, actually. How's the sentiment been out there? How do you feel out there? I mean, I know Chad Smith just did a gig out there, I think, last week.
At the Dreamland, is
Yeah.
it? Or the place next to it? Yeah.
So I guess people are starting to kind of come back and do things there and whatnot, right?
Yeah, it's tough on the businesses. The small businesses are really hurting because they rely on a lot of the tourist stuff.
Yeah.
Some of them won't survive, especially restaurants won't survive. But
Was your area like affected? Because I
No,
know some areas of Malibu are fine and some are devastating.
we burned the fire before.
Okay.
Lost fences and half a gazebo, and burned so close to the house that some of the paint blistered on our house.
Wow.
And it's just traumatic. I mean, even if your house didn't burn, well, that's the worst. But anyone who lives there, it's a life-changing event. I know people who've lived there for 30 years, and they're going. They've had enough. And if it came down one more time like that, it seems to be coming every year. If it comes down again that close to us, I might think about moving, which I hate because I love it there. We love our house, and it's raised our kids there, and it would be a tough move, but everything is changing.
Yeah, it's also really hard because, I mean, I live over here with my girlfriend. We have a place in West Hollywood, but I live in New York and I'm back and forth. But when you have 10 minutes to evacuate, and obviously we weren't really, there was that Laurel Canyon fire that was right by us, but you've got 5-10 minutes. Some people had 2 minutes to evacuate, and you got to grab everything. I grabbed our dogs and the dog food, and that's all I really need. But it is for people that have a lifetime of memories in the houses they grew up in. What do you bring with you, right? Were you starting to plan what you were going to bring with you?
Yeah, I did. I did the first time. I pulled out like a couple of my favorite guitars and all the hard drives from the studio and all that kind of stuff. This time I just said,
Fuck it.
Right. If it comes down, I losing that. There's so much in the house that I love. I have a lot of great old artwork in there, and a lot of religious I love religious iconic art, and have a lot of old stuff in there. And I have these 2 stained glass windows that are like 13 feet high and weigh 600 pounds each, and they aren't moving.
Because you even collect like pieces of the Titanic, and I know you have like a lot of artifacts. So Are those not at the house? Do you store those somewhere else?
No, the stuff that's, like I have a bunch of stuff that's worth too much to kind of keep in the house. So there's a great place in Hollywood that's fireproof, and it's almost like Mission Impossible. You walk in, it's finger recognition, all that kind of stuff. So I keep everything there, and a lot of people do. It's Foo Fighters have a whole thing of tapes, and I saw some Nirvana tapes in there.
Amazing.
Nirvana tapes, and the stuff we did. There's a bunch of that, the Sound City documentary.
Sure, yeah.
And Jackson Browne has a bunch of guitars in there. And, I have got a couple of guitars signed by McCartney that I keep in there that I don't keep at home.
We were just talking about the Hollywood Bowl because you have this, it's incredible. You're playing there soon. And we were talking about the history of the bowl. I was fortunate enough, 5 years ago to play there. And I was mentioning to you, I was so nervous that I'm sure I did terrible. But you're playing there. You got a great tour coming up, and we have so much to get into. But I always use you, Rick, as like the template of someone that looks so incredible. And I'm sure you've been asked this a million times, but it's almost like, what's your secret? Because I feel like you might be pescatarian. And maybe it's like due to diet and spirituality and meditation, it is like I use you as like the kind of like you and Lenny Kravitz, like you don't age ever. It's pretty amazing.
I don't know. I really don't. I really have no answer. I just tried. My dad died early, and I think sons take note of what their dad dies if he dies early, and it was. So I started eating well at that point when I was only like 25, 26. And, and food's part of it, but it's not That's not everything. It's some, there's a certain genetic thing, I guess. But, and I work out. I try, I've just had my vitals done, and they're all pretty great, thankfully.
Yeah. I
Knock
was like,
heavily
whatever
on
Rick
wood.
is eating, I need to get on that program right away. So I need to figure out what that is. But you mentioned your dad, Rick. Take me back to the beginning. You moved around a lot as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you were living in like a military base in Australia early on.
Yeah, the military bases back then, this is like the 50s, and that they weren't at all anything like the military bases here. The small, Australia was very small. Even though it's a big country, it's completely coastal. And, my mom always used to say if America had settled Australia, it would have been like Palm Springs all through the desert,
Right.
But the military bases that we lived on were basically, they just took over neighborhoods and mostly out. I lived on a farm.
Yeah.
It was a converted farmhouse, and they had houses around, but miles of fields, and it was an incredible place to grow up. So it wasn't at all like the military bases here were guarded and all that. It was what they had on one of them was cow rails so that the cows couldn't cross into the neighborhood.
What was life growing up? You had no television, from what I hear, and it was just the piano. And I guess your dad was a singer too, so that was your entertainment. It did sound like the 1700s or something.
It does.
But
I know. I think back and go, wow. I mean, I remember watching we didn't have TV. So I remember after dinner, we'd turn on the radio and we'd friggin' stare at the radio like this while, it's like it's a TV. And because we didn't have TV, like I know guys who, when they're on the road, they walk in and they turn the TV on because it's company. To me, it's just so intrusive. I never turn it on. I don't watch TV at home. We watch, like movies and stuff on a laptop if we want to watch it. But we didn't have a TV. So after dinner, we had to play our piano, the old pump thing, which I actually have in my house now. And
pumping being you had to press the keys to get it to...
Yeah, you pump it like that,
Right.
and it plays rolls. You put rolls on with the little
right.
dots in them. I mean, it really is 17th century
it does
shit.
sound like it. Yeah.
And we'd take turns at pumping the piano, and my dad would, and it would be all, Rodgers and Hammerstein stuff, and all their favorite. And I fell in love with all that music. And now some of my favorite composers are Rodgers and Hammerstein. The music is friggin' brilliant, and the lyrics are amazing. And so I was brought up with that. That's what we do after dinner. We'd go and sing. And my dad was a singer, but he didn't really want to do anything professional with it because he loved the Army. It was good, in the good old days when the Army really treated everybody well. We moved to England when I was 10 years old, and they put us on, it was like one of the last great steamships. We had our own cabin steward, and it was lined in wood, and it was
amazing.
It was awesome.
There's so many artists that don't ever come to America. I mean, a lot of the bands that you grew up listening to, I think like the Shadows and bands like that, never really made it in America. So what was that music that you were exposed to early on that really came to have you have this love for music that eventually got you into it at 13, I believe, right?
Well, there was the Shadows at first, where Hank Marvin was the first guy. It was the first real rock band, English rock band, and there were, people listen to it now and go, oh, it's surf music, basically. And it is that, but it was more dramatic, and he was a master of tone, and Clapton and Brian May and Ritchie Blackmore and all these guys are there because of him. And he lives in Western Australia actually now. And I was back there, last time I was back there on a kind of countdown tour was a big TV show that they threw a bunch of people on, and had like 10 minutes on, and I had dinner with him, and it was
amazing,
mind-blowing. I was 14-year-old inside me was screaming,
because he was like your Jimmy Page or something.
Yeah, he was, Jimmy Page acknowledges him too as inspiring. He was the first English guy that was a rock god. Before there were rock gods, guitar gods, and all these guys, he was the guy. They said, well, hang on, he's not American. I could do that too, because everyone was from America, and everybody thought, the Americans are just, their teeth are so white, and their skin, their hair, and they must be the food they eat, because they eat like shit in England.
Right.
And we just thought Americans were superhuman. I'm from Australia, and we got all the English music. Like I saw the Beatles in 1964.
Incredible.
And they were booked before they became big, really big. This guy saw them and said, they're going to be big. And so they had to drag their ass to Australia in 1964. And it was mind-blowing concert.
Now, when you see the Beatles in '64, what was the venue like? Was it like 1,000-seater, or was it smaller than that?
6,000 seats. It was
6,000.
Festival Hall in Melbourne, and it's the only concert that was recorded, filmed and recorded on their whole tour.
Wow.
And I was in that audience.
Amazing.
And they've just reclaimed it all, and because it was one of the biggest street audience that they ever had outside their hotel, like 120,000 people. It was crazy.
Was that their second record?
I seem to remember that they were doing
like Love Me Do and those early tracks.
Yeah, but it was. I think they did Ticket to Ride, if I remember right.
Yeah, so it might have been a little bit later.
Yeah, but it was definitely '64. So I don't. It's a long time ago, but it was incredible. They played 20 minutes, and I screamed like a little girl all through it.
I love when you see like the Shea Stadium concert, because nothing was even mic'd really then, right? And it's sort of like,
it's insane.
Yeah, you think about the sound quality now and what we've come to from.
I've got these two photos. One is the Shea Stadium with just lined with people, and the other one is some little pokey place in England when they were starting,
like
and there's
cavern
like
or something.
No, it was like just some crap ballroom that you're playing. You know, there was maybe like 6 or 7 couples dancing, and no one was looking at the stage. And here were the Beatles on stage. So that juxtaposition probably was like, I don't know, 2-3 years.
Incredible. So your parents ended up buying you a guitar at 12 or 13 after hearing Hank Marvin?
Well, they understood I love the guitar. I love the guitar so much, I would cut them out of cardboard, red Strats, and I paint them with nail polish or something, and I lip sync Shadows records in the reflection in the living room window in England. And then I started cutting them out of wood. They didn't work, but I had a little wooden tremolo arm, and they're pretty ugly, but they finally got the message and got me a guitar when I was 13.
And is it true that you kind of sawed that first guitar in half because you wanted it to look thinner?
I tried to turn it into a red Strat, because red Strat was it. And I sawed it in half. It was cost like £5, which is probably about $15 then. And I sawed it in half, sawed the head off, and made this Fender kind of Strat kind of head, very rough. And then I think I painted it all red, and then I restrung it, and didn't understand why it didn't tune out.
Or didn't work anymore. When you're 13 and you know what you want to do the rest of your life, and most people don't know that at that point, but you feel like you're calling, at that age, you kind of knew, right? And you were starting to kind of not go to school as much and drop out a little bit. Eventually, I think you kind of got kicked out because maybe you weren't attending.
Yeah, I was also was part of my depression too. I had started getting depression around 15. I wasn't successful in school. It was the only arena that, you kind of can judge how you're doing. And I was failing terribly. Wasn't good at any of the scholastic things, and wasn't like that popular a kid, and I was never really in the clique. I was always a kid walking around by himself singing songs in his head to make him feel better, And
it's hard to imagine that you weren't the popular kid, but I guess for whatever reason,
I was kind of geeky, I mean, I was a loner type. I still am a loner type, which is why I love to go out and play concerts, because really my connection with people everywhere else. I have a very social wife, Barbara. She's a social butterfly.
That's me.
And when we go out, she takes all that. I can just, kind of stand back like, yeah, how you doing, And she's like, oh, where you from? How many kids you got? And all this.
Right.
So she's my safe harbor,
Yeah.
But
well, you mentioned the depression. I know you openly talk about it a lot. You wrote a book about it. So early on, you go into school, you end up getting kicked out of school, but you battled with depression. At that point, I don't think people really knew what that was so much.
No, not at all. My mom was horrified when she heard that I'd written in my book that I tried to hang myself at 16. She, no, you didn't. She couldn't accept it, which understandably I get it, because we didn't communicate like that.
So what happened? You just walked in a room and decided it was over for you?
I stayed home a lot from school, because I just wanted to play guitar. I'd play guitar and I'd read. Used to steal these horror books from a secondhand store. Great Robert Bloch and Sheridan Le Fanu and August Derleth and all these great horror writers. And And I'd read, and then I'd go play the guitar, and then I'd read, and I'd go play the guitar. And that's all I wanted to do. The thought of school felt like going to prison for me. And I hated it, hated it, hated it. And finally was asked to leave with public school, by the way, who takes everybody. And because I got 0 on my, I hated to study. I thought homework was just a waste of friggin' time. And even then I realized, knowing the annual rainfall in Zaire wasn't going to, be a real thing I'd hang my hat on later on in life.
Definitely. But so you ended up, it just became too much for you, and then you decided, I'm going to just try and end this.
I was home one morning, and I was just really friggin' down, and I hated myself. It was really a lot of self-loathing. And I hit my head against the wall and awful stuff like this. Just, my parents were all out, of course. And I just got so mad this morning, I ran out to the shed. I knew how to make nooses because I was big into the whole death thing. I used to build like 6-foot guillotines in the backyard, and when my mom would get angry at me, she'd chop them down, and then I'd go and build another one. And I had little gallows, working gallows with trapdoors that I'd hang these little plastic cowboys on. I was totally into the death thing, and I just made a noose, and I ran out to the shed, and I tied it around there was a big nail sticking out of the beam, and I tied it around that and got a box or something, stood on it, and then just kicked it away.
Wow.
And I hung there for, a while, maybe a couple of seconds, and I know what happened, but I landed on the floor. And I had a big purple rope burn around my neck for like 3 weeks. And I wore polo neck sweaters, my mom wondering why I'm wearing polo neck sweaters in the 80, 90 degree heat of Australian summer.
When do you think I'm supposed to be on this planet, and that wasn't supposed to happen for me?
It did. It's not a way I recommend anyone to find out if they've got a calling.
Yeah.
But I did think, I was my head was very messed up then, and I remember thinking it coming in a little bit that maybe there's why am I still here kind of thing.
And at that point, you just decided, I'm going to give music a go, and this is probably my calling because I'm still supposed to be here, right?
Yeah, I really did think of it as a nod to like, give this a shot,
Yeah.
But I still had to fight my parents and everybody all the way until I was going to go back to school on this private school, the only one that would accept me after I'd been kicked out. And I was just beside myself thinking, I've got to go back to the cell,
Yeah.
And I'd been playing in little bands like Hendrix and Cream and that kind of stuff. And there's this guy named Pete Watson who was in a band called MPD in the 60s. They were very big in Australia, and he was a very well-known guy. And my mom came in one morning and said, Pete Watson's sitting in the living room, wants to talk to you. I went, what? I thought she was kidding.
This is pre-cell phone, so you had to go over someone's house to reach them.
Yeah, right. He had to come to my house to reach me.
Yeah.
And he, because he'd asked my parents first, because I was so young, said, I want him to join the band. Are you okay with that? So he said, I want you to join my band. I saw you playing in a club, and we have a guitar player that plays. And I said, wow, I'd love to. It's a paying gig, kind of, as much as you could get back then.
$5 or whatever.
Yeah, $5 a gig. Yeah. Well, probably more like 15, but yeah. And I said to my parents, he left, and I said to my parents, what should I do? Because I was really, I still had that, I've got to do something responsible,
right, and
not just, do the thing I love, because people don't do the thing they love. Look at everyone, and they said, what do you want to do? They didn't say, and I'm sure they'd say, you got to get an education, Richard. You got to, because my mom was always saying, become an electrician or something, so you got something to fall back on when the music thing doesn't work. And they said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to play guitar. They said, okay. And that was like, I suddenly felt the whole weight was lifted,
This is like 68, 69 or so?
I was 16.
And at a certain point, someone comes around Australia scouting for bands to play in Vietnam. When you think about that concept, actually, it's kind of a bizarre concept because the war was going on. And it's sort of like if someone said now, hey, do you want to go to a country that has a war going on and perform?
Anytime, yeah.
And it seems like a foreign concept, but I guess at that point, and I don't know how your parents felt about it, but were you just naive or were you just thinking, I need to go to Vietnam to perform with this band because it sounds like a great opportunity for me?
I thought I was naive. I thought I hadn't read newspapers. I knew there was some kind of fracas going on over there.
Right.
And I thought it was going to be like a USO tour, we're all protected and flown in helicopters, but it wasn't. It was just some guy, American guy in Saigon, who was picking bands up from Australia because it was the closest Occidental country. And all the GIs wanted to see was some, girls that looked like their girls back home. They got a lot of Filipino bands and they were surrounded by the Asian, community, but they wanted to see, some white girls,
Yeah.
And so we got a couple of girls, and which weren't in the band originally, but I was just a guitar player. Pete was the lead, and I said, "Yeah, let's go. I love to travel."
Let's head straight into a war.
Yeah, it was pretty.
Sounds like a good idea.
I almost blew the band up with a hand grenade.
Oh my God.
We stayed overnight. This is before, like, everyone shut it all down and said, they were, being real careful with people. But we did everything. We went out and we'd shoot everything from tanks to 45s. We'd have M16s that we'd shoot on full auto. We'd shoot into the bush. There were, like hookers everywhere, and one night they had a single hooker and they had like a line of like 40 guys.
Oh my God.
And it was just anything you wanted, within. I mean, anything was legal, and went up on a mission. We stayed overnight with a bunch of Navy guys on Marble Mountain, a beach outside Da Nang, and we got attacked. And we had guys. Some of our band were in the bunkers surrounding. It was just a fire base, And I was at the top at the Radio Shack. And we saw a helicopter get shot down, and they said, "There's movement over here. Are they friendlies?" And they said, "No, there are no friendlies over there." So I'm throwing friggin' 17. I'm throwing mortars down a tube that if I'd mistimed it, I could have blown my hand off first of all. But it was sending mortars in, and eventually it was a small attack. But you see green tracers going off through the sky, and it was. Kind of adrenaline pumping, It was. I didn't really fear that death then, but most of the other nights I did, because we'd be playing and there'd be rockets coming in. They say, "That's incoming, gentlemen. Go to the get these sandbag bunker." And we got shot at very regularly driving along these bush roads to get to fire bases. Because we didn't, like I said, it wasn't Bob Hope. It wasn't big stages. It were these little fire bases. And we'd play in a tent on sandbags. One time we were playing, it was raining, and the water was coming up like this, and we're on a sandbag stage, and we're hoping that we finish before the water reaches the electric equipment,
I mean, knowing how nervous I am, I probably would have taken the next plane out of there. But did you stay there for a while? I mean,
yeah,
I can't imagine getting attacked and be like, "This sounds like a good idea to stay for another couple of weeks or whatever it may be."
Yeah, we were committed. We were there for 6 months.
Wow.
And we were at the DMZ, the Tet, the Chinese New Year, after the big Vietnamese had all crossed all the borders and gone into the cities and shot everybody, and they'd been shot. And the Tet after that were a mile from the friggin' DMZ. And we're really, really scared. And at nighttime, suddenly they shoot flares up, right? These flares on parachutes so they can see what's going on. And you see a line of little black guys about this big coming towards you. It was freaky.
I would have taken the next plane straight out of there. Were you doing covers then? Was that Zoot or was that?
No, that was called MPD. It was
okay.
The old name of Pete's original band that had been very successful. It was now a show band, basically. And I was just a guitar player, and I had a feature, Love is Blue or something like that. But
then eventually you come back to Australia and you join Zoot.
Yeah.
Who are like Australia's Who, for lack of better explanation.
We were trying, we modeled ourselves on the Who, and and I throw my guitar up at 50 feet up in the air and shit like that.
Did you like being just the guitar player in the band, or did you feel at some point I need to come out in front? And,
No, I was very happy being a guitar player, a writer, a songwriter. I started writing songs for Zoot, and they started recording them. I played them a couple of songs. They go, yeah, we should record that for the next album. I kind of went, wait, what? No, these are just my songs. You don't want to put them on a record, but they did. And I started me on the writing path, and we had some hits, and I wrote a couple of hits and arranged. The most successful record was I arranged a version of Eleanor Rigby that people say now sounds kind of like Black Sabbath got a hold of it. I had playing I was trying to be Hendrix on it, but it was a big hit for us, and we had a couple like that.
The band dressed all in pink. I think Brian Johnson had a band from AC/DC where maybe they dressed in red or something.
No,
was it thematic in a way?
Actually, it was Bon Scott.
Scott. Sorry, Bon Scott. And he had a band where I think they dressed in.
They were called the Valentines, and we were Zoot. We dressed in pink for a while, and once I joined, I said, they wanted to get rid of the pink. I said, dude, this has got to go. Right. But the Valentines were in. It was orange, so I think it was supposed to be red, but it looked orange. And Bon was the second singer. He wasn't even the lead singer. And I've said this before. If you want to see how misused Bon was, check out Knick Knack Paddywhack, the Valentines, Australia. He's standing in his song called
Tambourine or something?
What's that?
Was he on tambourine or something?
Yeah, he was back there clapping. And he's like really happy, that he's...
One of the greatest singers ever on Handcrafts.
The greatest rock singer ever. Yeah. No one had any idea.
Incredible. Was there a scene in Australia then? Because obviously you had your bands, you had the Knick Knacks, and AC/DC hadn't started yet. So was there a bit of a local scene in Australia that was starting to really, like a rock scene that was starting
very,
to
very much so. When I joined Zoot, we actually went on a thing called Operation Starlift that, Valentine's, Zoot, all these lead singers, great, very popular singer at the time, John Farnham, who was the best voice in the world other than Bon. If you should hear John Farnham singing Black Dog.
Amazing.
And he was basically the moms loved him, but his voice was friggin' awesome. And every now and then he'd do like this wild song and he'd go, fuck. And we all went on this big tour around Australia, there were 5 cities, 6 big cities in Australia, that's it. But we all knew each other, and it was, we were mates, It wasn't like when you come over here, in the 80s, it was like you see another band, you kind of get an attitude like, fuck you, man.
You guys were all friends. But also, this is late 60s. So for some of those bands to get to the U.S. was probably really difficult. That's why, some of the bands, I think there's a band called The Angels or Angel City that was always...
Angels, yeah.
Angels, really big in Australia. Almost another kind of AC/DC band that never really made it in America, but huge in Australia.
Yep. And a lot of those bands actually... were Zoot fans and modeled themselves on the kind of the Zoot vibe, with the heavier stuff. Because Zoot originally was like a bubblegum band, with this same kind of thing as a Valentine. But I was a guitar player, so I pushed them, and Zeppelin was on the horizon, so I pushed them heavily into the guitar bass thing. So, and we were one of the first to do that. And I've heard since that a lot of the bands that came after were kind of fans and had been to our shows and that kind of thing.
Was that around the time that you got on a plane and happened to meet Elvis?
That was close to. The Zoot broke up. We had a terrible manager at the time, and we actually had a deal in America. I don't know what would have happened, but we're a great looking band, and we had attitude But we got kind of screwed by a manager on that. But so I went solo against my wishes. I was being pushed by this writer that was a fan. And eventually I wanted to go to America. I'd lived in England. All the bands were going to England at the time. I was going, I'm going to go to America. But it was really hard. I thought I'll go to Canada and sneak in over the border, or go to Mexico, sneak in over the border, but it didn't happen. So I finally hooked up with this guy whose records I used to buy when I was a little kid. He was now he lived in America, and he was hooked up with Steve Binder, who was produced the Elvis, the great Elvis comeback special. And so Steve and Robbie Robbie Porter was his name. Steve and Robbie signed me, and I came over to America. That was my way into America. And yeah, it was, that's how I got over here.
And at first you put out a couple of albums and really nothing happened.
Yeah, oh, you asked about Elvis too.
I did ask you what happened with Elvis, because you made Elvis on a plane. So
yeah, I was coming, because back then I didn't have a green card, and I had to get work visas. So I'd have to go back to Australia to get a work visa and come back. And I went back and forth like 6 or 7 times. It's a long flight.
Yeah.
And I would get on one flight that always stopped in Hawaii. Get on one flight. It was around 72, I guess. And I walked, I was in the back of the bus back then, of course, and I walked by, and Elvis was sitting like right there in first class in this pale blue suit. And he looked friggin' amazing, you know, hair and beautiful skin, and was skinny. And I walked by. I wasn't a giant fan back then. And I was into the Beatles and all the English stuff. It's Elvis. That's cool. I sit down, and he did something that nobody has ever done or would ever do, a celebrity these days. These days they sit with like their hood on and the glasses, and they're like this.
With a bodyguard.
Yeah. And he came back and signed autographs and took photos for everybody.
On a plane, amazing.
On a plane, before it was landing. And he got to me, and I said, hey, Steve Binder manages me. And he said, I love Steve, because they had a great relationship during the Elvis special. If you've ever seen anything on it, Steve guided him through that, because the Colonel wanted it to be a Christmas special with an ugly sweater and girls dancing, and Elvis being, you know, the Elvis that the Colonel wanted him to be.
Sure.
But Steve pushed him to be the guy that we all loved, which was the rock guy. You know, we knew he could play, he could sing, he had roots, you know. So they had a great relationship. So anyway, Elvis said, yeah, love Steve. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was a big fan. So I said, can you sign an autograph for me? And he said, sure. What name? I said, Allison. And he wrote, Allison, thanks, Elvis. And I put it in my little cassette recorder thing. And we went through customs, and they took my cassette recorder because they thought I had porn on it or something. And came back, and autograph was gone. Bastards had stolen it.
But you're right. To these days, that would never happen,
No.
Right? Someone comes up to you on a plane, you're like, get away from me.
Yeah. I had one guy that was asleep one time, and I had one guy go, hey, what? I said, will you sign this for my wife?
Like, I'm sleeping, leave me alone.
Fuck off.
So you come to America, you put out a couple records, you end up getting a deal with Capitol. How did that come about?
Well, that was Steve, and Steve kind of got that. They had photos of me, and my demos. I've always done pretty full demos. And so, you know, honestly, in the early 70s, they were signing everybody.
Yeah.
And so they signed me, and I put out a single, Speak to the Sky, that actually was a top 10 single over here. And it's since actually been recorded by quite a few people, like English and Australian people. It had been in prayer books, because it was kind of a holy roller kind of song. I wrote it because when my dad got really sick the first time. So that was a hit. And then I was doing these interviews for all these magazines, and I was telling them, yeah, I'm over here, I'm a writer and a guitar player, and I'm over here to, you know, pursue my music. And these articles would come out like, you know, Rick Springfield, is he too tall to love, or is he, you know, this bullshit.
Well, this is the time of like Team Beat and all the
and I hadn't done anything, right?
Yeah.
I'd had one hit single, and I was like one of the top teen guys that did nothing in these friggin' magazines. And they actually came to a point where they said, went to the magazine and said, who's going to be the next David Cassidy? And they all said Rick Springfield, which thankfully, you know, didn't have, would have been a very short career. But so they built this TV series around me, with cartoon TV series that we talked about. First, it was going to be, you know, we had guys, we talked about Yellow Submarine, we had guys who worked on Fantasia. And it ended up, I must have gone through the corporate mill, just another piece of Xerox crap, you know. But I did that for 2 seasons.
Do you think it hampered you musically, kind of becoming this teen idol in a way?
Very much. Well, no, that didn't, because the problem was when I left them, I first of all, I couldn't work because I didn't have a work visa. I had enough to, you know, do that kind of stuff, but I couldn't play. And that was a real drag. And then I left those managers because I didn't want to go the teen route, and they kept pushing and pushing. And I was going, this is not, you know, not working. So I left them, and then Steve did, and Steve was awesome. I spoke to him actually the other day. He's like 92 years old now. It's incredible. And Robbie said, Robbie sued me. for like $500,000 while
God.
I'm fishing quarters out of my friggin' piggy bank to go down and buy Swanson Happy Meals at the corner of Ralph's.
Oh my God.
So I couldn't work again there. So I was tied up for a long time. And somehow that worked itself out. And
somehow you end up getting this, you decide to act. I think your brother was an actor right, in Australia.
Yep.
And you decided, I'll give this acting thing a go, maybe to make some extra side cash, even though most actors in Hollywood, which is where we're sitting now, are actors.
It was completely naive. Right. And actually the woman that helped me was Robbie's ex-wife, right. The guy that was suing me. She meets me, and I realize now she was doing it because she wanted to decide if she wanted part of me in the divorce settlement, right? She said, you should come to the acting class. So I went, well, I'm not doing anything, maybe I can, make some money on the side. So I started going to this acting class, and that's when I met my best friend, Doug Davidson, who was on became like this lifelong Young and the Restless guy, but he's a hilarious guy and very deep. And his mom became my mom over here. And that was what was missing for me, was my connection with family. And they saved my life because I was, without belaboring the point, one point I was counting the money to see if I had enough money to go and buy a gun.
Oh my God.
It got pretty dark because everybody left me once I left this management. All the people I thought were my friends said, fuck you, we're out of here. Yeah. We have nothing more to do with you. So it was very hard. And actually, part of the reason I survived was not only Doug's mom, but it was also I met Linda Blair and I started dating her. It's fresh off Exorcist. And she was, had a lot of extra money. Yeah. And she helped me, live, and she'd come and stay with me out here. So it was kind of like her apartment too. So she really saved my life, and as well. I've had a couple of people that were really instrumental in me not offing myself.
My God, and people forget that General Hospital at the time was maybe like the #1 show on television, and you end up getting this audition. Was that just you going out on every audition in Hollywood, and how did that come about? How did you get to
It's weird. It's all those connections that you think, oh, that was bullshit.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have done that. I'd gone up on this, they wanted to do a male Charlie's Angels. And I went up on this call, and it never happened. The show never happened. But the casting guy ended up being the casting guy at General Hospital. And he called me up, called my agent up, who had done nothing for me for like months, and said, I'd like Rick Springfield to come in. I saw him on this audition. I think he might be good for the General Hospital. I said, what? Soap opera? What's the point? So I went, and I wasn't that interested. And I read, did my best though. I always try and do my best. And I saw these other guys like in velvet jackets and the big hair, and I'm going, they've got it, no worries. And I went home, and the guy called me up and said, how do you like being Rick Springfield? And I said, that's
it is what it
pretty
is.
Fair so far, or what?
Yeah.
He said, because you're Noah Drake now. And I said, what? So I got this part on this show that I thought no one will ever see. It will never relate to my music ever. It's a bunch of old ladies ironing who have the TV on in the afternoon. And Keith Olsen, who was a big 80s producer at the time, he did Fleetwood Mac, he did Benatar, he did Foreigner. Amazing producer, great guy. Well, tough in the studio, but he actually became a very good friend later on before he passed away. But he was my manager became, at that point, 76, Joe Gottfried, who owned Sound City, which was where all these bands had recorded their hits, including later on, Nirvana
Fighters,
did Nevermind there. So that was the whole reason Dave Grohl did that great documentary, Sound City. Yeah. And so he said, I got this client, Rick Springfield, would you do a couple of songs with him? He's just got to deal with RCA. And Keith, when he was starting out, had cut the clicks out of my first album where they dropped me in every time until I sang it in friggin' tune, because I was really nervous and everything. So he cut out all the clicks. He said, yeah, sure, I remember, Rick, I'll do that. And I played him all my demos, and he picked Jesse's Girl, and I'm going, why are you picking that one? I think there's way better songs on the demo reel.
Because you didn't think that would be the single.
No, I thought there were better songs on there. And but you know, it is what it is. And I'm fortunate that he picked that, and that his production was really instrumental in pulling that tight, because the original song was like had a big 3-minute guitar solo, and it was more kind of, it was almost Eagle influenced, you know, with the kind of Jesse's girl. It wasn't that slow, but all the parts were there. If you hear my demo, all the parts were already there. And even the, you know, on the, which I played cushions. I couldn't play drums, so I hit cushions. And so, you know, yeah. And then I was on, and he said, you don't need this General Hospital gig. The record's a good record. But I'd already had a couple of albums that I really believed in that had gone down the tubes. I said, I have no money. I've got to take this. So.
What were you making, like $500 a week for General Hospital?
It's $500 a show.
A show, okay.
Which was amazing. I had more money than I'd ever seen in my life. And I was working like 3 times a week at that point. And suddenly, and Gloria Monty, who was the big cheese that made General Hospital what it was, sidled up to me after I'd been on the show for like a couple of weeks and said, I hear you're a singer. I said, yeah, there's no way I'm singing on this show. It's already hit me credibility-wise. You know, so, and then for that summer, it became the #1 show in America. And I happened to just be on it, and then people started to go, oh, that guy's the guy that's singing this song, right? So it became a real rocket ride, you know, from that point.
Yeah, the story behind Jesse's Girl is an interesting one, because you were going to this, I mean, I don't even know if they have it anymore, but like a stained glass class or something, and there was a girl that apparently you were sort of longing for or in love with or infatuated with, whatever it may be. Lust. And tell me the story, because it's an interesting story.
I was living with a girlfriend at the time in Glendale, which is actually Doug Davidson's sister, which we were like a trio. We used to go everywhere. And I wasn't working, and I had a couple of acting gigs, but they're pretty sparse, and they weren't making much money. So I always loved art, and I wanted to do something in my hands. So I'd been making clay figures and selling them at the Rose Bowl, and for nothing. And I said, well, I think I might try stained glass. So I started going to this class and made a couple of windows, really terrible. But I love stained glass to this day, amazing. But there was this girl that she was just so hot. And I'd probably recognize her if I saw her now, even though she'd be, in her 60s? But she was so hot, and she had a boyfriend, and I remember his name. I don't remember her name. But she wanted nothing to do with me. You know, I'd try and... I was always shy around girls, and I'd kind of say, hey, how you doing? She'd go, oh, yeah. So I took my sexual angst home and I hadn't written a song in a while. And you know, the inspiration really has got to come. I can't force it. And I sat down and wrote this song of, you know, unrequited love, basically. I knew them. I knew her boyfriend, and, you know, that she didn't want anything to do with me, and it really pissed me off.
I'm sure she never knew the song was about her, too.
No, we separated. You know, the class only lasted a couple of months, but this is where there's hidden anger in that song. A lot of people go, oh, Jesse's Girl. But there's a lot of hidden anger in that song. Yeah.
What were the 80s like for you? Because I played in a band here in the late 80s, and, you know, I was very much part of that Guns N' Roses scene from 89 and 90. But what was it like for you? I mean, you're one of the biggest stars in the world. You're on General Hospital. Your record is exploding, Working Class Dog. What was that time period like? Was there excess for you? Was there drinking? Was there drugs? Was there women everywhere? You've been married for, I think, 40 years now. But at that time, was it too much? Did you indulge in what was going on?
Oh, of course, dude. You know, a young man. Sorry, I keep banging your microphone here. Is that all right? A young guy, when that happens, you know, is going to go south. When, you know, I was walking down, it was like 2 weeks. I was walking down the street, local street, and kind of feeling like nothing. Then 2 weeks on the show, I'm walking down the same street, and people are going, "Hey, isn't that?" So it's a mind blower. It's so much faster. Until MTV came along, you know, you had to have maybe 3 albums out before someone would recognize it at the airport. This was instant recognition. And I, you know, I was known as this on the show as this, you know, he did one operation and the kid died, you know, but he like screwed every nurse in the building.
He's a great looking doctor that never performed surgery, I guess.
One time, and he lost the child.
Right, that's what it was.
So, yeah. And
so you're walking down the street, people are recognizing you everywhere.
And, and you're getting hit on pretty much, everywhere you play. Because I do the show for 5 days. This is back when planes flew all through the night and the morning. Monday, Friday, and then I'd get on a plane after the show Friday and fly out somewhere and play a gig Friday night. Get up early Saturday, fly in another city, play a gig. Get up early Sunday, go to another city, play a gig, and get up super early Monday to fly back to walk in at 8 o'clock in the morning at General Hospital. So it was just it was like this. But I was enjoying it. It was very exciting. But the main feeling I had was, geez, it friggin' took so long. It took long enough. I've been here for almost 10 years. I always had confidence. That's something, I always saw that for myself. I'm very big on, visualization and manifestation and all that. And I always saw that. That's why I stayed here for so long when a lot of my friends had come and gone, back to Australia. I said, they're either I'm going to be successful here, or I'm going to die in the friggin' gutter. That was kind of my attitude. And, that's very important, very powerful, that kind of stuff.
Were there times that you thought maybe you weren't going to make it? And
yeah. God, very much so. My parents once sent me money to come home, and I thought about it, and I said, I can't do it, dude. I can't come home with my tail between my legs, to what? I've been away already for 8 years. What am I going to go and play pubs by myself? So I banked the money and lived on it for the next couple of months. My parents understood, but they were worried about me. And my dad my dad actually died when I was 21. I started to bleed everywhere from an ulcer. Luckily, he was in the hospital, but he was out for like 15 minutes, and they revived him, brought him back. But he had brain damage after that. And so he became like this little kid. And but he never understood my music anyway. He was Rodgers and Hammerstein and Oh Holy City and all this kind of great stuff. But I sent him an advance copy of Working Class Dog, and Mom said he was sitting in the rocking chair, and he's going, "This one's going to do it. This one's going to do it."
So he knew. He knew in a way that...
I think he just was my positive side, and could have very easily could not have happened, but he didn't. I don't think he understood it, but maybe he picked the energy up, because it had great energy, that album, the whole recording of it, the writing, recording, and everything. It just, Tom Kelly, who wrote went on to become a songwriter, Like a Virgin, all that kind of stuff. He was my backup singer. He and I did all the backgrounds. And halfway through it, he's going, all right, this is a happening record.
A track that Sammy Hagar wrote, I've Done Everything for You. And with Sammy, it wasn't a hit. It was a song that he kind of put out there. And he kind of put it out there. And for whatever reason, it kind of bombed for him.
Yeah.
But then you do it. And I think he jokes around saying, well, Rick is so much better looking. So obviously it did well. And you guys are lifelong friends now. I guess that song probably had something to do with it.
Yeah.
But when you first heard that song, did you know that song would have maybe been a hit for you?
I was actually kind of bummed that Keith, because I had 12 songs on my demo reel, most of which ended up on the album. But he wanted to do 2 songs, and he said, I'm going to bring another song in. I went, oh, fuck. Because I'm a very serious writer, however I'm perceived. I love to write, and I pour myself into it to whatever degree I can. And he brings this song, and it's basically a 3-chord, I've done everything for you. I'm going, oh, I know, I could write that, But there was just something about the song. And Sammy says he made that live album because they were thinking it would be his Frampton Comes Alive, because he's a great singer and rocks, but it just wasn't Frampton Comes Alive. It wasn't that.
Right.
And so Keith got this song. He'd done a couple of albums with Sammy, and Sammy was great. He helped me put like lights together for a Santa Monica Civic show, and one time I met him like again. We meet each other, like I'd be backstage and he'd be walking by with Van Halen and go, you need another song, Rick? But he's just a great guy. He's always never lost for words, and he helped me get stuff together and really helped me kind of get on the road. And so we became, friends then, and saw each other on and off all the time through that period.
Now you got a rum business together.
Yeah, and he called me up during COVID and said, I've got this rum company. You want to become a partner? And he'd already had a home run with Cabo Wabo, and he's not a guy that they give him something and they go, "Can you put your name on this?" He starts it from the beginning. He knows what plants he wants in it. Yeah. And so I knew I was getting in with the right guy because we had the whole music thing, the song, and we'd done a couple of shows together when we first started it, and we kind of linked, because of that. And I'd go up to Vegas with him sometimes to do some things and promote it, because it's actually in a lot of places in Vegas. There's called Beach Bar Rum.
Yeah,
and
pick it up.
And the Cola Spice is my favorite. I pull that out of the freezer, and it's like Bacardi and Coke on steroids. It's unbelievable.
I'm sure they carry it at Cabo Wabo because I've been to that club before.
They do. And they also carry all his other ones. Santos that he's got with
he's got a ton of them. Guy Fieri, I think, right?
Guy Fieri, who's a friend too.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little about a new record. You mentioned Sound City. There was a moment in time not long ago you kind of got to sing with the Foo Fighters for a moment. It's almost like you joined the Foo Fighters for the Sound City documentary for the record, but it's a great track you did together. What was that like? I mean, working with Taylor and Dave and everything.
It was great.
I mean, The Man That Never Was, right?
Yeah, Man That Never Was. Because Dave got us all together for the Sound City documentary, which is a great documentary. And
if you haven't seen it, see it.
If you haven't seen it, he's talking about, digital versus audio, basically. Uh-huh. I said, how are you going to put that across? But it's really heartwarming, and he interviews all the singers, Stevie Nicks and everybody that ever recorded there. And so he got us all together, and they said, well, we're all writers, why don't we write a song together? So I got with the Foo Fighters, and we went in there for a day and worked up a track. He had this riff that he sent me and said, I don't know what to do with this. Can we work on this? So I went in and we kind of created a chorus instrumentally for it. And so we laid down the track, and it was, friggin' Taylor was like first time. It's all these weird stops and stuff. Fuck, I'm not even getting it. And so we recorded the track, and then Dave handed it to me and said, go write a song. So I went back with my buddy Matt Bissonette,
sure,
who's played with everybody.
Yeah.
And we wrote "The Man That Never Was" over the track, and went into Dave's studio with Butch Vig, and we recorded the vocals and the guitars, and basically recorded everything again, I think, except for the drums, because Taylor nailed it so hard.
Butch was on the show. He has incredible Nirvana stories. I'm sure you guys probably got into it for a moment, but I mean, everything he talks about, you're like glued to your seat just hearing about.
Who's that?
Butch Vig. Was on the show.
Yeah, right. Well, he did the first album.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
It was incredible. But do you feel like you could like join a band like that? It was such a great track. Did you ever think to yourself, I have this incredible solo career, but maybe that's something I still have. It's on my bucket list of something I want to do.
Pat Smear's in there for good. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be ousting Pat. He was great too. He was very welcoming because I didn't know what I was going to walk into. You walk into someone else's turf. It's their studio. It's their mates. It's like walking into a soccer team and you're the new guy. But he was very welcoming, and they all were. They're really cool. And I love the track. I played it a couple of times when the documentary came out to my audience. They kind of didn't really get it because they weren't familiar with it.
Right.
But it's a great track, and so I stuck it on this
Big Hits 2.
Greatest Hits 2 album, because I think it's a great track.
Talk to me about Lose Myself, another track that's only available on Greatest Hits 2. And there's so many great songs on this record. But talk to me about this song in particular, because it's a single that came out. The record just actually came out about a week ago or so.
It did, yeah. Final 2.
Yeah. And Coffee Table Book, which we
coffee
could talk
table
about.
book, whatever a coffee table is.
Yeah. I guess this is a coffee table. I'm not sure, but...
Too small.
And you put out a lot of books. This is not your first book. I mean,
right.
I feel like this is like your third or fourth book.
Well, I've written, I wrote my own autobiography, and then I wrote 2 novels.
Exactly.
And I still want to write more. I loved it. It's just the time thing, But the coffee table book is a bunch of photos from over the last 20 years that Jay Gilbert, who has basically been my photographer all that time, has. You do a photo session either live or in a studio. and you use maybe 5 or 10 shots. So there's 150 shots no one ever sees. So he took the best of all the shots that no one's ever seen, and there's some really great stuff. Because, you know, it can be a great shot but not suit the project that you're shooting it for. And so he put it together in his coffee table. You got,
Why a coffee table? It's, it's like a pocketbook. What's a pocketbook?
With every 10 copies of the book, you get a free coffee table.
Talked about, I love, you know, I'm obsessed with animals, doing dogs in particular. We were just talking about, but you end up dressing up dogs on a lot of your record covers. So do you have a fixation with dressing up animals?
It's very weird. It's not my worst fixation, not my worst obsession.
It's a fun fixation.
Yeah. The thing is, I started just as a joke. Robbie, my old manager, who was managed me with Steve, I lived in the same apartment block as him and his wife, and they had this Irish setter named Jan that was just a goof. And when they go out for dinner or something, I'd watch him. And I had this Instamatic camera, and I just started putting my clothes on him. And just sit there like with this dopey look on his face, and I'd hang my jacket on him and put a hat or a scarf around him, and I'd crack myself up. I'd laugh all night laughing at his goofy look, and then I'd you know, 2 weeks later the photos would come back and I'd laugh again. And it started with Ronnie, my black and white bull terrier who was on the Working Class Dog album, that I, you know, dressed him up because I thought it would, working class dog, my dog. People like him, and of course the record company thought, you're on a national TV show, you want to put your dog on the cover.
I would do the same thing, by the way.
Yeah, I said, sorry, he gets more attention than I do. Walking down the street, a couple of girls coming towards me, like when I first got him, and I'm going, you know, okay, here they come, and they go, oh, look at that,
look at the dog,
he's so cute. So I get, all right, that's it.
Amazing. We have this 42 American Cities tour coming up. It's yourself. It's John Waite. I always thought that Will I had a Babies vibe to it, the song Will I, which I love that track that you do, but it always reminded me of a Babies track. So
oh, wow.
I'm not sure if you've ever heard that before, but it's yourself, John Waite, Wang Chung, Paul Young. You're playing at the Bowl, which we just discussed, but July 27th. A lot of great shows coming up. You excited about this tour? I imagine so, right?
Yeah, very much so. I was a big fan. I mean, I love John. We've been friends for quite a while anyway, but I love his voice, and still
one of my
he's got
faves.
One of the great rock voices. And you know, he's a lovely guy too. Once you actually get to know him, it can be a little
standoffish.
Yeah, a little upsetting. He got into fights with people, you know. But once you get to know him, he's just a friggin' doll, and he's an amazing singer, and so he's great. You know, you want people that are good to hang with, because you see him all the time backstage. You don't want any jerks. John Cafferty's joining it in the Beaver Brown Band. He's going to come on for some shows. Paul Young is just a super nice guy, really a real English gentleman. And, you know, I was a fan from that first album, you know, with the great Pino Palladino playing all those great bass lines. And I actually brought Pino over. I was the first guy to bring him over to America and play on an album I had called Tao. And because he had this great phase kind of, you know, chorus sound on his bass. It was amazing. I said, yeah, he came over and I said, yeah, I want that great chorus sound on your bass. He said, oh, that wasn't me, that was the engineer. I went, oh, shit. But he plays some amazing stuff. And then he ended up, you know, last time I saw him, he was playing with The Who after Entwistle died.
Yeah, he's a great player for sure.
Yeah.
We do these really fun, pressing questions at the end of the show, Rick, where we ask you your top 5 things. So we're going to get into your top 5 Australian rock bands. A lot of the bands that we mentioned didn't really make it here from Australia, but I'm sure that you have your top 5 Australian rock bands that you could think about, and some might have made it here and some maybe they didn't. But let's start with number 5.
AC/DC. Oh, number 5.
Let's start with number 5. Yeah.
Well, I've already given number 1 away. So fuck it. Ice House.
Ice House. See, I don't know Ice House.
Yeah.
And who were Ice House?
Ice House I fell in love with a single they did called Ice House. It's a guy named Ivor Davies, and he's very big in Australia. It's very ethereal stuff. It's almost Bowie-esque.
Never made it here.
No. You know, it was back in the day, I think, you know, I don't know. I don't know why some people make it from there. You know, In Excess made it from there, you know, and then came over here and killed it.
Are they number 4 In Excess for you?
I put them 3.
Number 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Number 4. Wow. Actually, hang on. Can I put? No, I got to put them 4 because. Sorry. 3 is Daddy Cool. Incredible band. Russ Wilson, if you haven't heard Russ Wilson sing, he's got that Stones kind of thing. And he had a band called the Pink Finks when we were all kids. And then he had a band called Sons of the Vegetal Mother that was like a Mother's Invention ripoff, but just bizarre.
Amazing.
And then he put together this band called Daddy Cool, and it was incredible. And they were huge in Australia. Had this song called Eagle Rock, which you should look up on YouTube. And they turned it around for Aussie bands, because back then in Zoot we had, like 5 hit songs, and we get $65 for a show. Right. They turned it around and could suddenly say, no, that's not going to work for us. Yeah. So they're a great band. And how many do I have left?
I think we're on number 2, if I'm not mistaken. I guess In Excess we spoke about a little bit.
Yeah, I had to put them 4, but only because I love these others a little more, because they're deeper with me and they go back a lot longer.
But what was it about In Excess that you loved?
Oh, they're just the groove was just unstoppable, and I loved his voice, of course, Hutchins' voice. But the groove was just, it was so raw and like right there in your face, and there was no peripheral. Oh, a little guitar riff over this. It would just bang,
songs,
bang, and it was, wasn't all pedal to the metal, but to be sharp guitars, and it was just juxtapositioning the instruments was really cool. I loved it. 3, I've had 3, didn't I? Daddy Cool. 2 would be The Church, who are probably my biggest playlist on my iPhone. A guy named Steve Kilby, who they're all from England. Originally came, but settled in Australia when they were kids. They're all what they call 10-pound palms, where they pay British families £10 to come and live in Australia, which is about $50. And then they stick them in these hostels. Oh, I miss the Easy Beats too. They're going to be
an honorable mention. The
2B, 2B, Easy Beats,
okay.
Which is where Angus came from. His brothers were in the band. His brother was in the band, George Young, and Harry Vander, who produced the first AC/DC stuff. Easy Beats were our first real Beatles. That was the 60s. So that 2 is a Church. Amazing. He's more than anyone. He's Australia's Bowie. Just such a chameleon. Doesn't really have like a mega voice. I mean, he's in and out of tune, but he's got a great vibe, and he writes such amazing songs, and from this to this, and incredible. You should. He had Under the Milky Way.
Oh,
was a big hit.
Of course.
It was a big hit over here.
And number 1, you mentioned it, the Kings of Rock.
AC/DC. No question.
Yeah.
Just
still doing it.
Yeah.
Are you a Bond guy, or are you a Brian Johnson guy?
No, I'm
assuming
absolutely
Bond.
a Bond guy.
Right. Okay.
I love Bond. We would all we knew each other because it's such a small scene from when he was in the Valentines. But my best friend in Australia, who I met when I was 14, he used to go and see him at the pub when they were just starting out. He said, they're amazing. They played this killer set, and they'd get off and walk over to the bar and have drinks with everybody. Hey, God, mate, And it was, but they took that spirit on stage. And Bond was just, from sitting back behind the lead singer in the Valentines, strutting up there and being the friggin' A+ front man of all time, almost, strutting, but almost had a kind of wink and a smile about it all. It was never like, oh, he's full of himself. It was all like, yeah, dig this, whatever, man. I'll get your girlfriend after, yeah. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But a lovely guy too, and just a friggin' horrible, tragic end. And I am absolutely a Bond fan. And someone sent, I did actually an interview that his family is putting together a whole retrospective, of him. And I talked to him about that, and it was, it just brought home his death was really just
tragic,
fucked, really
tragic.
Fucked. Shouldn't have happened. Same with Hendrix.
Yeah.
If he'd had the old girlfriend, he might have still been alive.
That's true.
Turned him over when he started.
Does the Australian accent come out ever? I mean,
not really, mate. I don't really have I can't even remember what it sounded like,
Because you actually went to like dialect school or something when you first got here, right?
And it was, I started acting, and it was hard for me to focus on the American accent and try and still go, okay, Oh, that's my phone. Shit, where is that?
I was like, what's that? I hear someone
Sorry,
barking.
you can turn that off. Of course, it's a dog
It's
barking.
like someone's barking. Is it my dog? Because my dog is...
Thank you.
That would be something my dog would do. But you're saying you went to dialect school, so you kind of got rid of the accent.
Yeah, I did. And my mom was trippy. I called her up one time going, yeah, Mom, I love you. Things are going okay, still working on it. And the next time I call up, I say, hey, Mom.
How you doing?
How you doing? Yeah, things are really starting to work out over here. And she never said the fucking word.
She's like, I guess that's normal.
Never said, oh, what have you done with your voice?
Well, Big Hits 2 is out now. The tour kicks off very soon this summer. 42 cities. Check it out. Maybe I'll come to the Bowl show if I'm here.
Yeah.
Awesome. Such a pleasure, Rick. Maybe we'll do a part 2 coming up.
Okay,
Really
cool.
appreciate you coming by. Thanks. Appreciate it.